I have learned a lot in my life, enough to know that it doesn't really matter how old you are. If something is wrong and you want to change something, you have to make the change happen. I don't want to sound like some self-help book or anything like that, but I believe that nothing happens by itself. If you want to make something happen, you have to go out and you have to work on it. You have to do stuff for it. It costs time, effort, and energy. Well, hopefully I can provide some insights and some wisdom I've learned along the way, and it'll be interesting to someone.
Oh, it's
So,
interesting to me. I think you're an amazing person. I just want to say thank you so much for this. This is great.
oh,
You went to school in Belgium, right? You're from Belgium,
yeah, that's correct.
and you studied computer science there.
Yeah, it might be good to give a little bit of context about I guess, my youth in Belgium. I was born and raised in Belgium, and let's just say that my school experience in Belgium was very negative. I had a fairly rough upbringing. My dad was always working. I don't mean like working overtime. He worked in Africa, and he'd come home once or twice a year for a week or maybe 2 weeks. And then at some point in time, my mom decided that she'd better be off partying or whatever it was that she felt like doing. So my brother and I were left to our own devices since we were 11, 12 years old. And at some point in time, life got rough for us. That it was our biggest concern was, okay, what are we going to eat today? And what kind of clothes are we going to wear? Versus, oh, I need to get good grades at school. And then, of course, being a teenager, you express that in different ways. And then at school, teachers, I went to a Catholic school, and the teachers were very much, will say something once, and if you don't get it, then you're dumb and stupid, and they'll call you dumb and stupid, and they're done with you. Don't bother asking questions. Don't. There were some exceptions. I had some teachers that were, every few years you come across one that they genuinely tried. But for the most part, most of our teachers were old priests, and they just didn't care. You opened your mouth, you got slapped, you got the ruler over your fingers. And, then of course, that wasn't very motivating to continue with school and stuff. So when I came out of high school, I went to work in construction. And just as an aside, in the meantime, I was doing a lot of programming on the side. I had a Commodore 64, and hacking was a really big thing. Hacking back then
Oh,
was different than what you understand now with hacking. It was basically you put in like a little demo, you crack a game, and then you give your game to your friends, and you have your little name in front of it. It's like, we're crackers, and so it was interesting.
so you're an old school hacker. You're an old school hacker, basically, right? I mean,
It's just fun, but it was all a machine language. No assembly, no C or Pascal. It was all machine language, so all addresses. And when I first looked at it, I think it was 12 or 13 years old. I didn't understand anything. And the brother of one of my friends, he was really good with. He's like, "Oh yeah, just look at this, and when you change this, this changes, and now you know that that changes. Now you can do the rest." I'm like, "Oh shit, I get this. I can do this." So yeah, that was a big light bulb moment. But that was kind of the beginning of my interest in games and programming, if you will. But so then again, fast forward to end of high school, I started working construction for my uncle, and I always liked him. My uncle, he knew a lot about a lot of things, and he was very handy. And so I learned a lot from him for a few months, and then he started being not nice to me anymore. And I was a bit confused. Like, I'm a good worker. I go in. I'm never late. I do my work. I work overtime. I need it. Why are you not nice to me anymore? And he said, "You're too smart to do this for the rest of your life." And I'm like, "No, I like doing this." And he said, "Do you want to dig holes for 40 years in your life? Do you want to lay bricks or chop wood or whatever it was that we had to do in construction for 40 or 50 years until you're broken?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Until 2, 3 weeks after that conversation, and I'm like, "Yeah, nope, I'm going back to school." So I applied for was a college with accelerated programs, and the degree back there, it's similar to a bachelor's in computer science in the US, but not quite the same because the general ed classes are not part of it, and it's called an H1 Informaticus degree. And so basically, what that is, you go in and you learn everything about computers that you need to know in order to program and understand operating systems that you work on and understand databases. And you have to do you have to do an exam to get in that program, and it's a math-based exam.
Oh.
And I was terrified of it because at that point I was under the impression like I am terrible at math. I know nothing about it. And I did really good in the exam. And so they allowed me in the program. And I remember the first few months I used to butt heads with the head of the program because she would say, I don't know how you got in here, but there must have been something wrong with the test. And so she checked my test 3 times to make sure that I didn't cheat or didn't do anything else to get in the program. But long story short, after a few months, I guess she got used to me and she ended up writing me a letter of recommendation, which was really nice. And I passed the exam, got my degree, worked in Brussels for about a month or two, three, and then came to the US. I went to Silicon Valley,
Wow.
and yeah,
Wow.
here I am.
Silicon Valley. That's
Yes, but the one thing I learned from my mid-20s was that you're never too old to learn. And for some reason, once I started programming and started getting into realizing how little I actually knew, I just wanted to learn more. And for a couple of years, it was hard because I didn't know where to go to. I mean, you can get books, and I read hundreds of books, if not more. But it's not the same. I think when you learn something, you have to apply what you learn. It's with math. I used to be so intimidated by mathematics until I realized, well, it's like speaking a language. You can learn all the vocabulary, but until you start making phrases and start applying it to what you're doing, you're just going to know a lot of vocabulary.
hmm
I mean, anybody can know vocabulary, but the art is in speaking and applying it.
yes.
And then I think the huge difference maker for me was when I read a book about mathematics where it said the big deal about mathematics is how it changes your brain. When you study mathematics, it changes your brain in such a way that you get an understanding of analyzing things that you won't have unless you do mathematics. And that to
Yes.
me was like a, oh my God, I gotta learn math.
It's great.
But yeah, but that was definitely a life changing moment for me mentally and for my personality. But so yeah, then fast forward, I worked for an internet security company for VeriSign for about 5 years, and then switched over to electronic arts. I did some driver development for audio cards and video cards. I wrote some drivers for a year, and then went to electronic arts. When I went to electronic arts, it was fun. It was great, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But at one point, I was working so much overtime, and I wanted to do something for myself that I decided, in order for me to stop working overtime, I got to go back to school because I need an outside commitment. And then I met you,
Yeah, I'm glad you did. It's great.
and you were by far the best professor I've ever had in my entire life.
Oh, thank you.
You,
Thank
you
you.
were
I mean,
amazing.
thanks. I mean, having you, yeah, you're amazing. So it's good. It's good that you're here. I really just thank you again for doing this. It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you still work at EA? Is that something we can
I
talk about, or do you
Yeah,
work
yeah, yeah.
some?
You know, we can talk about anything.
Okay.
I don't if there's something that I don't want out there, I won't say it. So
Okay.
virtually anything I say is okay to use. But yeah, I still work. I still work for EA. Um, I left EA 3 years ago to work on World of Warcraft for
Wow.
Blizzard. Yeah,
Oh, I love
they,
that game.
I know, me too. But yeah, I worked on it as the audio engineer because they were looking for audio people, and They were trying to recruit me for a couple of years, but I didn't want to move to California. That to me was a deal breaker. And then when the pandemic hit, they reached out and said, "Oh, by the way, how would you like to work on World of Warcraft, but remotely?" I said, "That would be amazing." But the only reason I accepted the interview was because there were some things, there were some struggles at EA. The projects that we were working on for a couple of years, it seemed to have no end in sight, and it was just not fun. And I have what I think is a very good analogy what the work was like. If somebody comes to you and they say, "I want you to dig a hole," but you have no idea what the soil is like. You can have some sand, you can have some rocks, you can have some different type of sediment in there, some whatever's in there, you don't know. So the first time you figure out what's in there, it's an interesting problem in the sense that there's some unknowns, there's some problem solving involved, and then there's coming up with various solutions and see which solution works best. And it's not easy. So you figure out all the problems, you dig the hole, and you go like, "Oh, that was great. I'm done with that. What's next?" And then they go like, "Well, you have to dig another hole." You already solved all the problems, but the work is still hard because you still have to dig the hole.
Right.
And you go like, "Okay, let me dig the next hole." And then there's another hole, and then there's another, and then before you know it, it's like, "Oh my God, I have to do like 50 more holes or however many." It it becomes frustrating and tedious. It's mentally not challenging, but it's hard and exhausting and tiresome and frustrating. So those things were going on. And then when they reached out, they meaning the people from Blizzard, went through the interview process and talked to a number of people, and they were great. And so I went over to Activision, and the first thing that came to my mind was like, wow, this really feels like how I used to feel about game development when I started working on Madden way back in 2005, where it felt like we were with a bunch of people in a garage working on a game and just making it as good as we could. And it was awesome. And I enjoyed every second of it. But then, because there's always a but, right? Then the lawsuit happened with Activision. I don't know how much you've heard of it or
Oh,
know about it, but there were some allegations made for sexual misconduct and things like that. And I thought that was really regrettable because it affected morale to some degree. And it opened the door for EA to come talk back to me because I still had, well, at the time I had a lot of peers and friends and they were talking and they said, "Hey, how would you like to come back to us?" And I'm like, "Well, I've only been there for a half year or something at the time. I'm not that interested." But they said, "Well, let's just talk about this and then see what happens." And I made a decision. There's certain financial aspects involved that made a huge difference, and so I went back to EA. Now, in hindsight, thinking back, was that the right call? Or I miss being on that team. It was something special, and I really loved the work, and of course I love the game and whatnot. So, but that's life. Sometimes things happen, and you make decisions, and you hope that you make the best decision for yourself, and you just deal with the cards that you get.
yes.
But in any case, yeah, sorry. So go back to EA. Worked on the Frostbite team for a while, and recently I moved to Criterion, and I'm working as a systems software engineer, focusing on memory on Need for Speed, and it's challenging and a lot of fun. So yeah, still at EA.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. So I think one thing that might be interesting for people who watch this channel, because this channel is really diverse. There's actually people from high school. Most people are in college who watch this channel, and then we also have college professors and professionals. I mean, it's really really diverse and people from all over the world. But a lot of people who watch this channel are interested in working. They're interested in becoming what you've become. I mean, you're kind of a legend, right? I mean, you worked in Silicon Valley. Is it Silicon or Silicon, or I can't say it.
Silicon.
Silicon.
I don't know if
Yes.
I pronounce it. It's silicon.
So you mean
It comes
yeah.
from the chips.
Oh, right, from the chips. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Silicon. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. I mean, you worked there like during like the golden age, like during
Yeah.
the dot-com boom. You worked at VeriSign, which is a huge company, and then you work for two really big game development companies. So you've been through job interviews, and you've interviewed people as well, because I know we've had conversations before. So when you interview someone who wants to be a game designer, what are some of the things that you look for?
Yeah, let me start by saying there are different titles and different categories, right? So when you say game designer, game designer typically means somebody who's involved with coming up with the creative part of the games. So they come up with ideas and um, we call them design documents where they outline in great detail of what certain features are supposed to be like. So if I can use Madden as an example, a game designer on Madden would work on, hey, we have this new feature that we want to implement in the game, some new gameplay feature, for example. Then they talk to the engineers about the things that they want, and then the engineers will get back to them saying like, yeah, we can do these things, or we can't, or we need to do some research before we can give you an answer to that, or we can do it to some limited capacity. There's basically a lot of back and forth going on, but the designers focus mostly on the non-engineering part, and even that line is a bit blurry right now because we try to give tools to the game designers that allow them to build the game without actually programming. Although there are some components that involve some type of scripting. Some people are good at scripting, and to some degree, it's similar to programming, but it's not quite the same. It really depends on the scripting language. If you have a language like Python, it's like programming. But then you have some other scripting languages, like for example, you have HTML, which is a markup language. It's not a scripting language, but you have some simplified scripting language that makes it more easily digestible for the human mind because it reads more like sentences, and you can lay out the rules more like sentences versus programming. If you go in C or C++, yeah, you can use variable and variable names, but some code is hard to read, and it's not for everyone. So game designers really come up with the features or the type of game or the direction that they want to take the game in, and then they talk to the engineers as far as in the things that they want to do and if it's technically possible. Then you have, of course, the engineers themselves, and their work spans the entire range of fixing bugs, maintaining code, refactoring code, basically making code better, adding new code, optimizing, things like that. So it's basically the actual programming work. What I've been doing my entire career, if you will, is I'm on the programmer part. So I write code. I like writing code. I'd like to think I'm semi decent at it, maybe, but that's what I enjoy. Um, so as far as interviewing goes, I'm usually involved with interviews for other programmers or other engineers, sometimes managers, and sometimes designers. Designers only when it comes to the domain that you're working in. So when I worked on Madden and NCAA and NHL and all the other titles I've worked on, I was usually the audio engineer. So whenever we needed somebody to work on audio that was new that was coming in, they would ask me to do the interview, even though it was not always programming or engineering based. So depending on the domain that you're in, you can do interviews for various roles. Interviews for other engineers, it really depends on their level. Meaning, are they fresh out of college? Are they an intern? Is it someone that has 20 years of industry experience? Is it somebody that has experience programming but not in the game industry? So we look at a number of things, and then we look at the role that is being interviewed for. And then we try to ask questions that are pertaining to the role. The questions, I mean, people get scared and intimidated for interviews, as do I. I've certainly had my shares of interviews, but what mostly is being looked for are two things. One, your resume. Don't ever put on your resume something that you're not comfortable with to the level that you expressed being comfortable with. I can't tell you how many times we've had people come in like expert C++ programmer and they don't even know what an abstract class is, or they don't even know how the virtual functions work, or anything like simpler in C++. And you go like, okay, can you give me an example of what you've done in C++? Well, I read an article about it. Great. Please don't put on your resume that you're an expert C++ programmer. So this may seem obvious, right? But I have talked to some recruiters, and they ask people, if you have been exposed to anything, just put it on your resume. And it could be good to get attention, but it's usually really bad when you put something, well, usually it's guaranteed bad if you put something on your resume and then you can't answer a question about it. So that's the first thing. That's super important. The other thing is you have to accept the fact that you are going to be asked questions that you don't have the answer to, or even questions that after spending some time on it, you're not going to solve. Some people do, some people don't. But what interviewers typically look after is, how do you go about solving the problem? What is your process? Because if I ask you a question, for example, if I ask you, hey, design me an MP3 player, how would you lay out the classes? How would you couple all the various classes? How would it work together? How would you define the interfaces? Things like that. If I were to ask that, you may come to an answer, you may not come to an answer, but if I see the process that you follow, then I can tell from that process, okay, you didn't find the answer now, but I know you would have in the next half hour or an hour. Sometimes people get to an answer and I look at how they got there and it leaves me wondering, do they actually know what they're talking about? Or was it sheer luck? Or because their process doesn't make sense to me. So usually you look at the resume and you look at the thought process that people follow to get to an answer, and it tells you a lot about people. And sometimes if people ask a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to say like, look, I don't know. I would have to look this up or would have to look into that because I don't know. And that's okay. It's better than sitting there for 15 minutes rambling on something that leaves both of you wondering like, what are you actually talking about here? So yeah. Anyways, I hope I kind of answered your question
Oh,
there a
no,
little bit.
that's perfect. It's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Thank you. So a lot of people want to get into programming, and they're students and stuff. And one of the challenges that people have is a lot of these jobs. Like if you go on Google's website and you look at some of the jobs that Google has, like to work at YouTube, they require experience. So how do you get job experience if you don't have experience? What advice can you give people? Like, should they build their own portfolios by doing projects? Is that something that can help them get noticed?
So if I may use myself as an example, um, way back in 96, 97, when I first started working as a programmer, I've always had an interest in the game industry. And incidentally, the first company I worked for, so just a little bit of a side note here. I started working for a startup company in Silicon Valley back in 97. And then that startup company was bought by VeriSign, which is how I ended up in VeriSign. But yeah, it was a payments portal, internet security stuff. But in any case, the building that I was working at was in Redwood Shores. And to the right of it was the EA headquarter building, and it was right outside my window. So all day when I was sitting at work, I would look at their headquarters, go like, "Man, EA." So and then when I went downstairs and I went out in the cafeteria would face the Sega headquarter building for the US division.
Sega.
Yeah, remember that?
Yes.
So I would sit there, it's like, man, Sega. So but that was to me almost like a daily reminder of where I would like to end up in my career or in my life. And I eventually ended up there, but it was not an easy road. So I could obviously program, but there's a huge difference between someone who just learned programming in class and wrote a couple of whatever projects you work on in school versus professional code. Even now, sometimes I wonder, wait, does this make the code professional or not? There's some standards that you have to adhere to, but there's a huge difference in the way you write code. And so what I would do, I would look at job ads for game companies. There was back then, it wasn't even on the internet back then, it was still in the papers. But because it was, Bay Area, California, there were plenty of startup game developers there. And so I would send out my resume and get interviews. And I would go into interview. I remember my very first game programming interview. I bombed it so bad. It was embarrassing. But what I did was I talked to those guys even when the interview was done. I said, but if you have a few more minutes, can I ask some questions? And I asked questions specifically about the things that I failed or that I thought I had failed during the interview. And what that did was it gave me some insight in like, oh, okay, these are the particular skills that they're looking for. And so then I did another interview focusing on those particular skills, making sure I had those nailed. And then my next interview was so much better. Not good enough, but a huge improvement. And then I asked, okay, what did I do wrong here? Or what do you think I need to work on? And sometimes people say like, oh, you should or shouldn't ask these things during interviews, but they're people just like you and me. And if they see that you're motivated and you have the willingness to learn, it carries a lot of weight. And so after my second interview, I learned so much more. I learned about things in programming that I didn't even know existed in programming. Certain type of data structure, certain type of algorithms, things like that. And it may sound intimidating, but it's just another unknown thing. And once the unknown becomes known, all of a sudden it's not that difficult anymore. And there are a number of things, and I suppose we can talk about that in a little bit later. But there are a number of things that you do, and it's called, well, I call it reinventing the wheel. But you should still do it for very good reason, and we'll get into that, I suppose. But in any case, so then the third interview went really well, but I didn't accept. So they actually made an offer, and I didn't accept because I didn't want to move to Utah.
Utah.
Utah. Yeah, I don't even remember how I got that interview, but they called me. It's like, oh, hey, we're looking for some people, and you might be in. We got your resume. I was like, yeah, sure. But the most important part, what I did there was that I would do my work. I would come home, and every spare time, every spare moment that I had, even instead of sleeping, I would spend time working on my own games. I would write game engines. I would write rendering engines. I would work on games, demos, anything that seemed interesting in a game industry. Like I would play a game. Like for example, I was playing Diablo, and I'm like, man, I must be able to make a game like that. And then I made a Diablo like well, action RPG type game.
Yeah.
And then I started playing EverQuest. I'm like, wow, I gotta play EverQuest. And so here is the thing with EverQuest. So I wrote my own MMO on my own. It took me, I think, about a year and a half, and it was so good. Well, I thought at the time it was so good that my neighbor, who was an investor, got his investors together and they wanted to fund me to start my own company to
Wow.
publish the game and release the game.
Wow.
And I kept telling those guys in that interview, the meeting, whatever we had, I kept telling them, like, look, the artwork that I'm using is artwork from Neverwinter Nights and Counter-Strike. Because I'm not an artist, I can't make models.
Right.
So I'm just using the publicly available models and animations there, and I just use them just to demo it. And this one guy, he kept going on about, man, your artwork looks so good. I'm like, but it's not mine. But so while that was going on, I got an interview at EA and Redwood Shores. And so I went there and we were talking about a number of things. And eventually we ended up talking because I had no game development experience. I had a couple of years of programming under my belt, but no game development or no professional game development. And so eventually we ended up talking about the games that I was working at home. And the interview said, well, okay, I think we've talked enough. Why don't you go home, grab your laptop and show us your game? I was like, yeah, great, sure. So went home, went back the next day, showed my game, and I got an offer. That's how I got
Wow.
into EA.
Wow.
So yeah, it was so when people go like, oh, you need experience to get in there, professional experience is typically always preferred. But if you show skill, motivation, if you can show something like, hey, look, I spent the last 6 months every weekend or every day working on this, and here's what I have. And, you build your own portfolio with stuff that you have. It carries a lot of weight. It, and sometimes just getting your foot in the door is enough because once you're in, it's up to you whether you can stay in or not. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it shows more like determination too. I almost think it's better because like your story, like you did it on your own. Like you taught
Yeah.
yourself. And I think that, I used to work with this guy. I used to say that one of the things you learn in college is that you learn how to teach yourself. I don't know if that's true, but I kind of feel that way. You learn how to study because you take all these teachers, and sometimes you don't understand what's going on in class. So you have to teach yourself. You have to be able to do that, and you've been doing that your whole life. It sounds like. I mean, with the gaming and the programming and stuff. I mean,
Yeah. Even now at work, every day I come across things that I think like, wow, I've never encountered this. How do I solve it? And sometimes you come up with a solution within half an hour, and sometimes you sit days on it. Or sometimes you have to ask someone. Like I have some of my coworkers that I think they're incredibly smart people. And usually if I try to do due diligence, and if I'm stuck, I would ping them on Slack typically. It's like, hey, I'm looking into this. Do you have anything off the top of your head? And sometimes they do, which is great because it saves me a lot of time. And sometimes they don't. It's like, that's okay. I'll just keep digging until I figure it out. And I think just to tie in school and work. So I think the biggest problem with school, or maybe not school, but with students, is that most of the problems that are being asked of them to solve, they can Google and get an answer. When you're out in the real world and you encounter a problem, you don't know if there is a solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. There may be, there probably is, but not always. I've worked on some things that it was just, at least with my skill and knowledge, it was just not solvable. And we go like, hey, we gave it a shot. We worked 2, 3 weeks on it, and we just can't get it to work. Okay, great. It sucks, but let's move on and let's work on the next thing. It happens. And there was a problem that I worked on with it was on Xbox and PlayStation 3 where we mimicked VoIP, the voice over IP from a headset and played MP3 samples back. So we basically hijacked the system. We played MP3s because the feature was like when you play with your friends at home and you have your headset on, we want to have a
mhm.
coach talking to you and not to your other friends that are playing with you. And there were so many bugs in the Xbox SDK and in the PS3 library that we reached out to Microsoft and Sony, and we had them change and fix those bugs. It was great. It made me feel really good. But I spent I think almost 3 months on building that.
Wow.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was it was it was a huge task. But it was fun. It was like I think back on everything I've done in my career, that was by far the most challenging and interesting feature or thing that I wrote or that I worked on. It was a lot of fun. Very
So
rewarding.
so was it stressful at the time, and then looking back, it's like I'm glad I went through it, kind of thing?
Yeah, because I remember my lead at the time, he kept coming by. He's like, you spend quite a bit of time on this. Are you sure you're gonna get this to work? Because this was for Madden, and we don't miss Madden ship dates. Madden ship date is there. We ship no matter what. And that's why we used to have a lot of overtime, which it's a lot better now. But I remember way back, I used to work 90, 100 hours a week, 7 days
Wow.
straight through.
Wow.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was it was it was not fun because you
Wow.
get burnout, right? Everybody burns out after that much time because mostly sleep deprivation, and you just start tunnel visioning on things, and the quality of your code actually goes down over time. So when you rest it and when you're fresh, you fix things, the quality is usually good and the problem is fixed and it's done. When you get really tired and fatigued and your brain is not functioning properly, you fix one thing, but you break one or two other things. And so instead of actually going down and bugs that you fix, you actually start going up again. And when people take metrics and they just follow the numbers, they kind of lose track of, hey, the rate of our numbers is not going the right way. We need to change something. But because under so much pressure, they're just like, no, more hours, more people. We need to get these numbers down. And sometimes it comes a point where adding more resources is just not helpful. You get past a critical point, if you will, where it becomes beneficial and it actually turns into becoming detrimental to reaching the goal. But yeah, in any case, sorry for that ramble. Yeah, it was very rewarding. It was scary. It was very stressful. But the danger was that every day I felt like, oh, today is going to be the day that I get this to work. Because when you write code, you kind of know when you got something and it's kind of working, but there's a problem. It's like, oh, if I can only spend 1 more hour on this, and I'm going to fix this, I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to have this, and 1 hour turns into a week, and then you look back, it's like, what happened this week? I don't know. Yeah, but it's dangerous. Um, I think it is very important to be able to pull yourself away. And it is very important to give yourself a break. I'm sure you've heard there are a ton of analogies between your brain and muscles, and even though it's not a one-to-one relationship like that, your brain does get fatigued
Hmm.
and you do get tired. And I think the biggest problem with that is your concentration, right? Because once you start losing your concentration, then everything is. I have to say, I don't know if you can hear the baby in the background, but if you do, I do apologize.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's
Okay.
great.
But yeah, concentration and lack of concentration is that's a killer. And
Hmm.
I think the best way of retaining your concentration is you have to do something that's fun and relaxing sometimes. And sleep, I cannot stress how important sleep is.
Yeah.
So I cannot
Yeah.
stress enough how important sleep is. But yeah.
Is your workload better now? Like currently, like it's much more manageable, you think?
Yeah, it is. So without going into too many details, my previous position on the Frostbite engine team was a bit of a mixed bag. Some things were really good, some things were not good or enjoyable at all, and it left me questioning a lot of things. And um, so when I moved over to the team now, I'm actually not stressed at all right now. I really enjoy what I'm doing. I like working on the game team side because work is different. Because when you work on a game, okay, I think I should provide some context here. So we have engine teams and we have game teams. So within a game team, you have people that work on the rendering engine, you have people that work on audio, you have people that work on AI, on gameplay, UI. There are a whole number of different domains within the game. They're all considered part of the game team. But the tech that they build, the code that they write, it sits on a number of libraries. When you work on a game, you want to focus on making your game. You don't want to have to worry about, oh crap, I have to write this driver that works with this particular video card that works on this particular platform. You don't want to write code that is like, oh, okay, this is just for Xbox, but I have to rewrite it completely different for Sony PlayStation or for Nintendo. You just want to write your code. That's it. So we have the engine team, and the engine team provides the tools for the designers to say, if you have like an Unreal or a Unity, Frostbite they have a Frost editor. This is the same thing where you can go in and you can set up game rules, game logic, you can load up assets, and you can basically build your whole game and see what your game looks like. It's similar to Unreal Engine. And so that's what the engine team does. Now, the focus is very different because on the engine team, what you try to do is you try to write code as as robust as possible. You try to take into account as many things that could go right and wrong, and you try to handle all of them. And you try to build user interfaces that work for all the teams. But if you work on a game like Madden, or you work on a game like Battlefield, they have completely different needs and requirements. So it's hard to deliver something unified that works for everyone. So there are some divergences, and things work better for some game teams than for others. But those are the kind of problems that you solve. But in general, things take a long time before things happen. Whereas on the game teams, it's typically, hey, we need this and we need this now. Make it happen. It looks ugly. It's not the greatest. Does it work? Yeah, that's all we care about. Let's move on. It's a very different, and I'm making a bit light of it. There are obviously checks and bounds, and we have code reviews in place, and we have unit testing, automated tests. We have a lot of things in place to make sure that the code that you write and that you submit for the game that is in the game, that it's not causing any crashes or any bugs or things like that. So, but it's a different mentality, and it's a different work process. So.
Nice. Nice. Interesting. Interesting. Let's circle back. You were talking about reinventing the wheel earlier.
Yes.
Yes. What did you mean by that?
So what I mean with that is that it's not such a thing as you have to pay your dues, but there are no shortcuts in life. If you want to get good at something, you have to put in the time, the effort, and the attention to get good at it. So I have thought about this for a really long time, right? You have some people that play guitar for 3 years and they sound like a virtuoso. You have some people that have been writing code for 5 years and they seem like a programming god almost. And then you have people that played guitar for 50 years and or 40 years and you hear them, you go like, ooh, what happened? And there is actually an explanation for that, right? And the explanation is people plateau. And when you plateau, it is up to you to stress yourself enough to break out of that plateau or to just sit there. So that's why I think sometimes people do 20, 30 years of something and they never gotten past a certain point because they just stop pushing themselves. And I think the I know the better you get at something, the harder it gets, the more effort it requires to keep improving or even to maintain what you have, whether it's a physical skill or whether it's a mental skill. Now, with mathematics, I'm sure you see it all the time. People go like, "Oh yeah, I used to be really good at this, and now I can barely do like a very simple equation
All the
because
time.
they haven't done it. They forgot how to do it, right? But there are no shortcuts in life. If you want to get good at programming and you want to keep improving yourself and you want to stay good at it, you have to write a lot of code. But you can't just write code. You have to write your code and you have to look at it and be open to criticism, either from yourself or from someone else to look at it and go like, okay, what is not good about this? And how could I have done this better? And when somebody tells you something, I know people, especially now, it seems, people tend to get offended very easily. People get offended when people ask questions. People get offended when they take something a certain way. People get offended because somebody says something that they think is inappropriate. I, I think I think unless somebody calls you out personally, you should maybe take a step back and ask yourself, well, why am I offended by this? And sometimes there's good reason to be offended by it, and then that's great. By all means, be offended. But sometimes it's just your own interpretation of what you heard or seen. Like when I get feedback from people, especially at work, I made a decision for myself or a choice for myself a long time ago to not take anything personal. When somebody says something to me, especially about my code, I don't care if they say it with the best of intentions or with the worst of intentions. All that matters is there is a criticism. Why is there a criticism? Because if they mean to undermine you or if they mean to help you, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is something could have been done better. So take that, understand why that's there, and then try and figure out, well, how can I do this better? So next time when I write something like this, that criticism won't apply. There may be something else, but that's okay. I'll deal with that next time. But but don't don't let your ego hurt yourself. Be open-minded and be willing to accept that, hey, you know what? Maybe I thought I was good at it, but maybe I'm not. And the only way to know that is when people give you feedback. Don't kid yourself or be delusional about things in the sense that, oh yeah, I'm the best programmer, or I'm the best musician, or the best at the no, nobody is the best. There's always someone who's better in some way or shape and various things. So just learn.
So good. I totally agree. So good. You always have to be growing. You always have to push yourself, and yeah, be open to criticism. I agree. I totally agree. I mean,
Yep.
that's how we learn. That's how we grow. And if you don't grow, then it's just, I mean, what's the point, right? I don't know. I think it's better to always work on self improvement in whatever you're doing, whether it be mathematics, programming, whatever's a musical instrument, whatever it is you enjoy doing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there've been a lot of things. So if we talk about the internet, for example, there is so much garbage out there.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
you look on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit. Take any of the mediums that are out there. It gets spammed with just garbage.
Hmm.
Some things are mildly entertaining or funny or whatnot, but I don't even waste time looking at it because it doesn't serve any purpose for me. So I can look at this for half an hour, and then after half an hour, I'm probably going to feel annoyed or frustrated or feel like I wasted my time. I rather pick up a guitar and play or play a game because if I need to relax and I play a game after half an hour, that's not wasted time to me because it allowed me to recharge. That's fine. But don't zombie out in front of something just because it's there. And the thing that okay, short rant here, I
No, rant. I
suppose.
can talk about this forever. Go ahead. This is good.
But the thing that really kills me, especially in the US, is the glorification of stupid. It really bothers me when people post things or say things that are just either despicable or bad or dumb or and then they come up with all these things why it's supposed to be funny and cool and great and it's like a badge of honor and or an achievement. I remember when I was a kid, if I did something stupid, I got smacked. Why? Because it was stupid.
Right.
I'm not saying you should smack someone for being stupid, but but it made you think like, oh, you know what? That was dumb. Maybe I shouldn't do something dumb. But most importantly, because when you do something dumb, it's a reflection upon yourself.
Hmm.
You know, you're not funny or clever. You're not cool when you do say stupid things. And I think what I struggle with most is I call it willful ignorance. People are ignorant. Everybody is ignorant to some extent about something. The difference is if you know that you're ignorant about something, what are you going to do? If you care about it, you try to educate yourself, you try to get smarter in it so you're a little less ignorant. And if it's something that you can't put in the appropriate time or effort, you defer to someone who's an expert in the field, whether it's a doctor or a mechanic or whatever it is. You defer because they have the credentials and the reputation that they know what they're talking about and they know what they're doing. Willful ignorance is being ignorant about something and choosing not to educate you and insisting that you know better even though you have no credibility whatsoever. That's the part that I think, especially young people, it oh, I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep ranting here for a
No,
second.
rant forever. I agree. I can. This is really good. This is great.
What one of the most profound impacts I ever had in my life was in my English 1 and English 2 classes. We had a professor. Almost everybody in the class couldn't stand her. And they were making her life miserable in class too. I thought the class was full of a bunch of idiots. But I thought what she was trying to teach and the way she was teaching it, it was so mind opening, especially for me at the time where we were talking about writing essays, doing your research, what are credible sources, what are not credible sources. She basically gave everybody the opportunity in class to learn critical thinking and to not take what somebody says at face value if you don't want to, but do your research. And I don't mean like do a quick Google search. I mean, look at libraries, look at reputable sources, and actually dig in and find out. And I thought she was amazing with that. And that's what I learned in that class. I've been able to apply to everything throughout my life: mathematics, physics, programming at work, things at home, taxes, stock, you name it. I've been able to apply it throughout every aspect of my life. And I thought having a teacher like that teaches you something like that, to me, that was priceless. And I sent her an email some years after I had taken her classes, thanking her for what she had done and how much of an impact that had made on my life. She was the first person that made me realize, hey, you know what? I am not stupid about certain things. I just don't know. But now I know how to find out the things that I need to know about the areas or the domains. And then I met you, and of course, your math was amazing. So that was really good. But it made a difference, right? And I think the sad thing now is that the people, we have my fiance's daughter. She's 11, and she's a really good example sometimes of how she takes things that she saw on TikTok somewhere or on YouTube, and she just parrots it back.
Mm-hmm.
And I go like, okay, she's 11 years old. She doesn't think the way we do yet. And I'm trying to tell her all the time, it's like, wait a minute, just take a deep breath and try to think about for a second what you say here.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand for an 11-year-old, that's a bit more challenging to do, but that's where the danger is, right? Because that age group, the teenagers, they are the most exposed to all the crap that's out there.
Totally.
And it forms the way they think or the lack thereof. And I think it's the same way with working out. If you want to run a marathon, you don't get up tomorrow out of bed and you decide like, hey, I'm going to run a marathon today, because I promise you, first of all, you won't do it. And second of all, you will be in a world of pain for the next couple of weeks. But it's the same with your brain. Whenever you learn something new, or whenever you're in the process of learning something new, it doesn't just happen as like, oh, now I don't know it. Oh, now I know it. It takes days, weeks, months, years sometimes to actually learn something.
Mm-hmm.
And the process is not always enjoyable.
Mm-mm.
It requires effort. It's tiring. It's like a workout.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what it is. But if you don't do it, I think like your muscles, your brain just gets lazy, and you forget how to look things up. That's how that ties into the interview part when we interview, especially students, where if you don't give them the answer, like when we have interns, for example, if you don't give them the answer, they're lost. If you take Google away from them, they don't know what to do. And I try to tell, especially the interns that we get, I was like, look, do the work, like put in effort. If you're stuck, if you don't know what to do, my door is always open. Come talk to me, come see me. We can have a conversation. I can guide you or not, but do the work, put in the effort, because at the end of the day, it's worth it for you. So, wow, that was a long way from reinventing the wheel,
I'm
which
moved. It was deep.
which brings me to the point of reinventing the wheel. But that's really what it is all about, right? Um, Linked lists, the certain data structures, certain algorithms, computer science one, computer science two. You go over all these different type of containers. Containers just parts of memory where you can store data in a certain order or a certain way. They're all there, and I doubt that you're ever going to write a better algorithm that you get with some of the standard libraries. Right, the way to implement linked lists or certain other containers, or the way certain algorithms you're not going to do any better. But that's not the point. The point is not for you to do any better. The point is for you to write it yourself, so you have an understanding of how it works and you solve the problems that people ran into initially. Because if you can do that, then you know that you're analyzing and solving problems the right way, and you can solve any problem within reason. But the point is, do the legwork yourself so you have a better understanding. I've done a lot of STEM talks, and I've talked to a lot of kids when I did the teach-in days at school and whatnot. And the most frequent question was, how to become a game developer or how to become a game programmer. And I think if you want to do that, you have to ask yourself a very simple question with a not so simple answer. Or maybe it is a simple answer, I don't know, but write Tetris. Can you do it? Or can't you do it? But here is the kicker, right? You can or cannot doesn't necessarily mean that you can be a game developer or not. If you can go all the way through without giving up, then yes, you should go into game development if that's what you choose to do. But if you can't, if you give up somewhere along the way, then please don't go into game development, because it doesn't get any easier. It just gets harder. But the reason I bring up Tetris is because it's a game that has all the aspects of game development. It has rendering, it has AI, it has music, it has interface, it has everything that you would need in a game. And if you can handle all those things and end up with something that works in some way, and you enjoy the process, then yeah, go for it, man. You're good. let's get you into game development.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've both been on the internet for a long time, and it's interesting because when I look at your life, I think about my own life because I mean, I worked for AT&T, I think in the late 90s, and I had an opportunity to take like this course and learn about Unix, and it was like a huge raise, and it would bring me into the tech industry. And I was just, a stupid kid, so I didn't do it. And fast forward 7 years later, I went to college, studied mathematics. So uh, I wanted to be a programmer like you. I taught myself
Yep.
C. I wrote a really dumb video game. It was called The Legend of Karsuka. It was like a
Nice.
text-based RPG, and
That's
I
awesome.
and I wrote an IRC client that would disconnect every 5 seconds. Something with the socket code. I couldn't get it to work.
Oh no.
So like yeah. So I switched to math just because I was really good at math, and I forgot where I was going with this. Oh right. So the internet. So we've both been on the internet for a very long time, I guess, because we're about the same age. And do you feel that the internet has gotten worse or better over the years? I know it's a tough question because I'm thinking of like the internet early 2000s to now. I mean, it's just such a big difference. Um,
I, I think a bit of both. So I think it has gotten better because anything you want to find, you can probably find on the internet. Some things are behind a paywall, which I don't always necessarily agree with, although sometimes it's warranted. But what I think is really amazing that you have classes from MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard that are free for people to take. If you don't pay, excuse me, you don't get a degree, but the opportunity to learn is there. And I think that is so huge because sometimes I look at those classes now. Like, as a matter of fact, here's an interesting tidbit talking about learning. About a month ago, 2 months ago, my fiance said, like, hey, there's this Python class that's offered and people are raving about how great it is. I've worked with Python on and off, but my bread and butter is really C and C++. I've done work in Java and a number of scripting languages and whatnot. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll take it and fill up some gaps and just leave it at that. It was like I think a 6 week course, and I did it in 8 hours or 9 hours. I did all the assignments, but here's what I have to say: that professor that taught it, holy crap! If only I had him in my programming classes because he was amazing. The material was excellent. His way of teaching he kept you captivated. He kept you engaged. The problems that he asked you to solve were the right difficulty. So each chapter or segment of the course had a number of exercises, anywhere from 4 to 6 exercises, and they got progressively harder. But if you paid attention during the lectures and you read the slides carefully, you had all the information that you needed to solve the problems. And even better, throughout the course, as you progressed through the course, you were forced to start using outside resources, basically read the manual and the reference guide for Python in order to do what the assignment was asking of you to do. But the way it happened, to me, it seemed like the perfect cadence. It was the perfect rate of taking someone who knows nothing about Python to finishing the class, and you should feel empowered to write something in Python now. And I'm not talking about a hello world, but I'm talking about something more meaningful, something more fun, if you will. And that was an amazing class. And I kept thinking, why didn't I have this guy for my programming classes when I was learning like way back in the mid 90s? Because it would have made a huge difference. And I think professors like him, like you, like Professor Werner at SSC, you guys, all of you had a huge impact on my life as far as in getting rid of that stigma that a lot of people have, imposter syndrome, or they feel like they're dumber or more stupid than other people. And I think unless you have a physical handicap or something physically wrong with you, I don't think anybody is stupid or smart. What defines a genius? I think somebody who's just well versed in either a lot of domains or well versed in one specific domain. They just It's not just that they know more, it's about how they approach certain things. But anybody can learn. It's not there's nothing out there again within reason that you can't learn if you wouldn't apply yourself to it. I think the bigger question is, do I want to spend 10 years of learning this to know the one thing I want to know? And you may come to the conclusion like, yeah, okay, I'll just take your word for it. It's not worth it for me. But that's a personal choice, right?
Right, right.
But I think anybody can learn, and and so you say that I'm smart. I'm really not smart. I'm slow. I'm not witty. I'm not quick or clever. Like my fiance, she's clever and witty. She cracks me up all the time, and I ask her, how the hell did you come up with this? This is so brilliant. And she's like, well, it's nothing for her.
Same way. I'm not clever or witty either. I'm with you there. I feel exactly the same. So
Yeah,
I look at people who are clever and witty and I think, wow, how are you so clever? How are you so witty? And
right.
I look up to them. It's like, yeah. And like,
I
I'm not.
know. Yeah, yeah.
It's good to hear you say that.
But the one thing that I got over was like I said, I used to think for a long time that I was, stupid or slower than other people, or people would know things and I go like, wow, they're so smart that they know this, and I'm such an idiot that I don't know this. And I've come to accept that it has nothing to do with any of those things. It just means that they have spent a lot more time within a domain than you have. And if you care enough, if you want to learn, spend some time and learn it. And if you don't care enough about it, then don't. But it has nothing to do with being dumb. I remember when we were in Calc 1 or Calc 2, maybe, there was this guy. He would come up and he would always sit right next to me, and we'd go over homework assignments. And he's like, "Wow, how do you know this?" I'm like, "I just did this." He's like, "Yeah, but that's crazy. How did you know this?" I'm like, I said, "I just spent this week 35 hours doing nothing but math exercises all week long." He's like, "Wow, that's amazing." I'm like, "How much time have you spent on this?" He's like, "Oh, like 5 minutes now."
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like,
Big difference.
I, and I told him, I said, "But that's why you struggle with this. It's not because I'm smarter or I'm better. I spent 35 hours on these set of exercises because it is worth it to me and it is important to me. You had different things that you had to deal with, whether it's by choice or not, or maybe, maybe the guy's working two jobs and it's time. I don't know. It's none of my business. But you get what you put in. If you put in 5 minutes worth of time, you're gonna get maybe something out of it. But if you spend a significant chunk of time in it, you're gonna get a large thing back. And that's what I always used to tell, because I did a lot of not tutoring, but when we had the study groups, and I would always tell people, it's like, well, you come in these study groups and we're supposed to be prepared for this, but you can't even solve for X. This isn't Calc 2. Like we were with a group of people, we were 4 people, and I'm like, you want my help, and I don't mind helping you with the calc problems, but you don't even like when we get through the calculus, we end up with some algebraic equation, and you can't solve it. Why can't you solve this? Because they didn't know or didn't remember any of the rules of algebra. They
Mm-hmm.
couldn't solve for X.
Yeah.
But if you can't do it, I can't hold your hand through. Because you see, I don't mind holding someone's hand, but it's a waste of my time for me to hold your hand if you're not gonna do the effort that is required to do something with it.
Right.
And that's the problem that I have sometimes with people. They just want the answer and they don't care about putting in the effort.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a waste of time. Like if
Mm-hmm.
if that's what you're gonna do, then just be upfront about it, and I'll go on my way, you'll go on your way, and we'll both be happy, or not,
Mm-hmm.
whichever. But you always run into students that are they're you can see they're driven, they're
Mm-hmm.
inquisitive, they're curious, they're trying. So this is something that was very important for me, and something that I always try to impart on my daughter, that it is okay to fail. When I grew up, if anything was done wrong, especially from the first time you did it, you were immediately discarded as in you're just no good. You're just not good enough, or you got punished, or whatever negative consequence would happen. And what it ended up doing was it ended up making you afraid to do anything. Because if you did something right, you just wanted to sit on it because, hey, you're perfect, you got the thing right, and you didn't want to do something else to to tarnish your perfect thing. And all it ends up doing is is limiting you from learning things. And one thing that I have learned for myself is the only time I actually learn something is when I make a mistake. Because if I do something and the result is correct, I don't know if I did it right or not. I could have done everything completely wrong, think I understand it, and completely not understanding, and just happen by chance to come to the right answer without knowing that what I did was actually right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you do something wrong, you know it's wrong, and you're going to look for your mistakes. And by looking for your mistakes, you're going to learn more about it, and you're going to get a deep understanding. And it's that deep understanding that enables you to actually learn things and get better at things. So I always used to tell my daughter, try, give it an honest effort. Try once, try twice, try 10 times, 20 times, however many tries you need to take. It is okay to fail. It's okay to fail once. It's okay to fail 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
Just try to learn from it. You do something, you look at the results, you try something else, look how the results differ, try to understand why they differ, which one is better, and then try to do something along those lines and keep picking away until eventually you get to where you want to get. And in the meantime, you will have learned the things that don't work. You will actually have learned something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, especially when I grew up, it's, I don't know if people call it old school or not, but it was very much, it was very strict, and it was not very conducive to wanting to learn things, because you would sit there in fear of saying the wrong thing because you were afraid of getting punished. And back home, it used to be like, oh, if you don't notice, that means you're dumb and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not that you're dumb and stupid. It's just that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something, I think, for kids now too, depending on the environment that they're in and whatnot. I think it's okay for kids to experiment and try things out and see what the results are, what the consequences of what they're doing, and try to understand, well, why did that happen? If you pick up a glass or you pick up an object and you drop it, it goes down. Why is that? Well, because of gravity. Well, what is gravity? Okay, now we're going to go on a whole different path to understanding what that is, but let them learn.
Mm-hmm.
Take something, or let them take something, like even if it's pushing a glass off. You pushed the glass off the table, it fell and broke. Well, now it's broke. Now you learned that if you push something glass off the table, it's going to break and you're not going to get it again. Everything is a learning process, but I think it's important to encourage people to make mistakes.
Yes.
Which which takes me to my last point, which is school. I have a lot to say about school. What I really like about school is when I took calculus, I would spend 30 to 40 hours studying and doing exercises. Studying not so much. I would learn the definitions, and honestly, most of the time I read a definition, it's like, yeah, okay, I read the words, but what does it really mean? Because the way it's worded, it's so hard to digest and understand sometimes. It leaves you more like, yeah, sure, okay. But once you start applying it, that's when things start to click. And we used to have that software. What was it? What was it? Pearson
Yeah.
something, I think.
WebAssign for calculus.
WebAssign, and
Yeah.
they would give you practice exercises that didn't count against your grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go through those over and over and over and over again until, like, yeah, I got this, I understand this. And I would make a ton of mistakes along the way. And then I would do my homework and get 100 on my homework because I did all the other things so many times that by the time I did the homework exercise, like, yeah, this is easy. I know exactly what I'm doing. And that was great. But then going forward to a lot of other classes, you go into the online homework system and you get penalized for trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
never understood. It's like, but I, I sit here as a student. I want to do this. I want to learn and I want to practice. But I'm afraid to use the tool because the grade gets locked in and you can't change it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to do it because I don't want to get a bad grade. So
Mm-hmm.
how do I solve this now?
Yeah,
It's not conducive to having people learn. It makes you afraid of making mistakes, and I think that's bad and wrong.
I agree.
So
It
so yeah,
goes
that's
back. Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. Sorry. No.
No, go ahead, please.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier about that Python course you took online, where the teacher was amazing, and I think the word you used was cadence. You said the cadence was like the pace was
The
perfect,
cadence, yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the cadence. That's the word. The
Yeah.
cadence was perfect, and at the end of the course, you felt like you could do something significant. It's the same thing with any course you take, right? You want to have
Yeah.
a course that motivates people to learn and rewards them along the way, and confirms their knowledge along the way, so that so that they can succeed. So when you do things like that, when you put in those punitive practices, like, making homework due every day, or penalizing you for practice questions, I don't know what that's about. I have some theories, but I won't go into them. But I don't think it's a very good way to teach a class, and I don't think that's a good way to be as a human being. I think it's just bad. I don't think
Yeah,
it's good, because students are students. I don't think people realize, when people go to school, they're trying to learn, and they're just students, right? A lot of them have jobs. I mean, you had a job. I mean, you had a family.
yeah,
I mean, that's hard. I mean, you go to
yeah.
work and then you go home from work. You're tired. You're exhausted. I mean, you should be able to just relax, but no, you got to do calculus. Like, oh my God. Like, and then you did it for 35 hours. So I think
Yeah.
that's what separates people, sometimes, people who succeed and don't succeed. It's putting in that work. And sorry, I'm ranting now.
Sometimes people make compliments. They think I'm smart or clever in some way, and it's nice to hear. And sometimes I have people that think I'm stupid, or they call me stupid or an idiot, or that's fine too. I just think they don't know me. I know of myself, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not fast, but I know I'm a hard worker,
Hmm.
and especially at work, I think give me any problem to solve, and if it's solvable, given enough time, I will solve it. That means sometimes I have to do overtime, or sometimes my bosses are nice enough to go like, yeah, if it takes you some time, just take whatever time you need to try and get this to work. And that's nice because not everybody has that luxury, if you will. But I think people sabotage themselves sometimes, and I certainly used to do that a long time ago. I always used to feel inferior to my coworkers, especially when I started working at EA, because I'd go there and everybody that I worked with, to me, it seemed like, wow, they know everything. Like any problem I'd run into, I would sit in there for hours trying to debug it and figure out like what else can I do because I'm not seeing it, I'm not understanding it. And then somebody would come by and like, oh yeah, it's that. I'm like, how did you know? He's like, yeah, I fixed this. I fixed something similar like last month. It's that. It's like, oh, okay. How long did it take you? Oh, 2 days. I'm like, oof, okay. Feeling less bad now. But so at Blizzard, this was really interesting because I worked on a task at Blizzard, and it was some feature that I was working on, and to me it seemed like it was taking forever. Like I felt like, wow, I'm spending weeks on this, and I felt so bad. I'm like, oh my God, they hire me and they're gonna fire me now because they think I'm the biggest idiot on the planet. And then I finished it, and one of my coworkers go like, wow, I can't believe you're already done with this. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, the guy that we had trying to do this before, he spent a year on it and couldn't get it to work.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, wow. He's like, ah, you only did it. I think it took me like a month or a month and a half or so. I don't remember the exact, but something like that. I was like, wow. And I'm sitting here every day going like, oh no, I'm like the worst engineer ever.
What a
But
story.
yeah, but that's stress, right? It gets to you, and it's I think it's human nature to compare yourself to other people, especially if you in a particular branch, or if you work with your coworkers. It's hard not to compare yourself, and I think sometimes it's applicable to compare yourself because it's reasonable to make a direct comparison, but oftentimes it's not.
Hmm.
And especially when you start newer in the industry, it takes a minute to find your groove, if you will, to kind of get settled in and be comfortable enough, have enough of a basic understanding in order to help yourself to solve things and get along and do well. But you have to be patient. And like I said, everything comes down to effort. If you want things to go faster, then put in more effort. And for people like you and me, I think you have the same mentality as me, that if you want to learn something, you could sit down mornings, days, nights, and just kind of grind it out, right?
Yes.
But life doesn't like that.
Mm-mm.
You have responsibilities, you have chores, you have things that you have, especially if you're in a relationship, you have other obligations, if you have kids, you can't just do that. So putting in an effort requires sacrifice.
I was thinking that when you said it. I'm getting goosebumps. Go ahead. Sorry. That's
Yeah. And you literally make a choice. What is more important to you? Sitting down and watching a Netflix movie for 2 hours, or sitting down and writing code for 2 hours to get better, or sitting down and doing math exercises or physics exercises, or spending time with your kid, teaching them stuff versus like, ah, I'm tired, just here playing my phone for half an hour. And people, I don't like to use the word sacrifice. To me, a sacrifice is okay, I want to do A and I want to do B. I like to do both, but I can't. I make a sacrifice not doing B so I can do A. That's a sacrifice. If you're doing something because you want to, or you're responsible for it, and not doing something that you don't care about, that's not a sacrifice. That's either you make the right choice or you make a poor choice. But at the end of the day, who determines what you do is the right choice or the wrong choice? It's you. You're
Hmm.
beholden to yourself. And if you spend a year watching TV and you look back or you reflect on the year that has passed, well, what have I done? And you feel that you're unhappy with it, you can't change the year that has gone by, but you can change the year that's coming. So make better choices for yourself. And the way I make decisions, I would say 9 out of 10 times, when I think about doing something, I don't think about. I mean, obviously, I consider how much work is involved, how much time, all those things, because they're the facts of the thing that you're trying to do. But what I think about is how do I feel, or how am I going to feel when it's done? And if it's something that I go like, wow, that would be awesome if I can say like, hey, I did this. That to me makes it worth it. That's my reward. So I will put in the effort to get that result. If I go like, oh, I would put in all this effort and I really don't care about the result, it's meaningless to me, then I'm probably not going to do it because the effort is not worth what you get out of it.
Hmm.
But always try to think, because people are they're direct, right? You ask someone, oh, would you like this piece of chocolate? And the only thing I can think is like, oh my God, that chocolate would taste so good right now. It's like the most delicious piece of candy ever. Just give it to me right now. Right? But then you had it and you go like, I already had this big lunch and I already had a piece of cake and I really didn't need the chocolate. Now I feel bad because I didn't really need it, nor want it. I just kind of jumped on it at the moment. That's something that I do different in my life. I try to not jump on things because you feel like it with an impulse. I try to think about it. Well, how am I going to feel about this in half an hour or an hour? Or how am I going to feel about it after the fact? And if I think like, well, I'm not going to be happy about it, then don't do it. And a lot of it comes down to routines. You build routines for yourself.
Hmm.
You want to go up and run every morning, and then you wake up in the morning and go like, oh, okay, I'll start tomorrow, not today. Well, how many tomorrows do you have to pass before you go like, okay, today I'm actually going to go out and do it?
Hmm.
And I think that right there is what makes the difference between people that accomplish things and people that don't. Now, it's a very common saying where they say the first step is always the hardest. It is in a lot of ways. But the first step is required to build a routine. And once you build a routine, things become easier because you do things not because you have to think about it, you just do them.
Hmm.
So if you don't like certain things in your life and you want to change them, put an effort to change your routines, and a lot of things will just fall into place. And again, I don't mean to sound like some internet weirdos. These are just things that I have learned throughout my life that tend to help me in doing things that I enjoy doing or help me feel rewarded with stuff in life or accomplish things. So
These are things that are true. These are things that are true. I agree. And the routines, I mean, to build a routine, it takes discipline. Yes. Yes. Everyone's like, oh, what did he say?
I know, but I think it's important that you strive to be the best version of yourself in all aspects
Yes.
of your life.
Yes.
And I think that's a good reflection upon yourself. Especially with kids around. I tell my stepdaughter all the time, the way you conduct yourself, the way you behave, the way you speak, it's a reflection not just upon your parents, but also upon yourself. If you speak like a hoodlum, people are gonna look at you and treat you like a hoodlum. If you're rude and obnoxious, then people are gonna avoid you. If you speak with thought and articulate, then people are going to pick up on it and you're going to get a lot more respect from people because people tend to appreciate that. Which again ties us back to the whole internet culture that's being questioned right now in the
Hmm.
current atmosphere, if you will. But I think it's important to carry yourself and behave yourself in a way that is good and respectful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important for yourself, and especially at work. We have people with all kinds of personalities, but in general, except there's always the one off that you have somewhere. But in general, people try to be very respectful, friendly, professional, and then I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time when I was going through that, I still struggled with feeling dumb and inferior, or feeling like I was just too stupid to get it.
Hmm.
But 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 that's not true. And the way I got around it was by realizing that sometimes the way some people explain it just doesn't work for you. I don't sign up for the whole like, oh, I'm a visual learner, or I'm an experimental learner, or people learn. That's it. And it's just, if you want to learn, you make an effort and you're going to learn. But for me, the effort to learn was sometimes I would have to get 4, 5, 6 books on a particular subject matter, and they would all explain the same thing, but different ways. But I needed all of those different ways to connect all the dots in my head. And then after reading like the fifth different explanation of the same thing, it's like, oh, I get it now. Like a light bulb moment. It's like, yeah, something just clicked. I got it. And sometimes people, especially at school, students, they go in and they try to learn something and they just have like one resource and they don't get it and they just keep reading the same thing. Oh, because that's what I used to do too. I would read a chapter like 10, 15, 20 times, thinking if I read it 30 times, I'll get it. If you don't get it after 2, 3 times, you're probably not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean to give up. Look for a different resource. Look for someone else that explains the same thing in a different way. And that made a huge difference for me. I have books here. I have some books that have 4 or 5 copies of the same topic by
Mm-hmm.
different authors, because
Mm-hmm.
all of them, for me, explain things in such a way that I understand a little bit from him here, a little bit from him there, a little bit there, but the whole makes sense to me.
Thanks for being
Yeah.
here on the podcast.
Thank you again for having me on the podcast. It was very enjoyable. I had a lot of laughs, and it was very interesting talking to you.
All right. Take
We'll
care,
see you
Dom.
next time.
Yep. See
Cheers.
you next time.